Well, between the gubernatorial primary on the Republican side of the ticket, the battle between Haley Stevens and Andy Levin in the newly drawn 11th congressional district for Michigan for the U.S. Congress and more. It was very interesting and very, very important primary election night on Tuesday of this week. And of course, now we're joined by Dave Dulio. He's the professor of political science and the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University to go over all the results of that and the impact it will have on November's general election. Dave, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Good to see you, Tyler.
Appreciate having you on. So we have our gubernatorial race set for November. It will be between incumbent Democrat Gretchen Whitmer and Republican challenger Tudor Dixon from the west side of the state, who will be battling for the gubernatorial election in November. In terms of what catapulted Tudor Dixon to this victory on Tuesday night, we saw that she was near the top of the polls for a while, but maybe wasn't such a clear-cut leader. And then they have the results of the election last night that had Tudor Dixon winning by over almost 20% over Kevin Rinke in second place. So a significant difference there. How much of a difference do you believe that Donald Trump's endorsement had and her finally getting across the finish line and really taking that lead?
Yeah, I think it's real simple. I think it put her over the top. I think the Trump effect is felt very strongly in that in those final results. I think you see, one element of that, one measure of that is the fact that Tudor Dixon, at least in Oakland County, where we have these kind of results to the detail of them, she really ran away with it on election day voting as compared to absentees, right? So that tells me a couple things, right? One, that Republicans who were undecided, waited until the end and probably waited till that Trump endorsement came before casting their ballots. And then there's the factor that, Republicans embrace absentee voting at least in the last couple cycles, less than Democrats. So, that there was always going to be a high number of people who voted on election day in this GOP primary. But Tudor Dixon really killed it on election day voting.
We're joined by Dave Dulio from Oakland University on the Michigan Megacast. He is the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University as we come out of the primary election season in the state of Michigan and head toward the November general election. Of course, as stated, Tudor Dixon, the Republican challenger now against Governor Gretchen Whitmer, coming up this fall. It's going to be a heated battle. It already is a heated battle. Republicans have been, of course, on the offensive against Governor Whitmer, whether they've been going for the gubernatorial nomination or any other nomination in the state of Michigan. What do you believe at this time is going to be Tudor Dixon's biggest hurdle to overcome in order to defeat Governor Whitmer in a state that in many key population areas continues to trend more Democrat?
Sure, I'll give you a couple of them. One I think is, and some of them are related. One is name recognition. She's known among Republicans, certainly, but not all Republicans. Not all Republicans voted for her. Even in the primary, right? She got 40% of the vote. And so name recognition. She's going to have to introduce herself to voters around the state, and of course, it takes money to do that. She needs to raise as much money as she possibly can, as quickly as she can. She faces Gretchen Whitmer, who has a huge campaign cash advantage over her. So that's going to be really important to watch, not only on Dixon fundraising, but if and when third-party groups come in on the Republican side and try to spend in support of the Dixon campaign. And then I think you have to look at the issues that are going to be where the election is sort of fought, right? Inflation, gas prices, roads. I think education will come up. I think you'll hear both candidates talk about abortion. So how does that get? Where does the sort of issue landscape fall?
We're joined by Dave Dulio, the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, joining us on the Michigan Megacast. More information on oakland.edu about upcoming events and seminars with the Center for Civic Engagement. Again, oakland.edu for all of that information. other interesting information. We'll go to southeastern Michigan in specific. In Oakland County, the big battle in the primary for the Democratic side really was between Haley Stevens and Andy Levin in the newly drawn 11th district. Andy Levin, of course, previously representing areas of Macomb County, but of course resides in Bloomfield Township in Oakland County, losing that race to Haley Stevens. In the end, very close race between the two of them. What put Haley Stevens over the top versus Andy Levin in this particular area that does tend to be very much progressive, even within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Tyler, I don't see it that way. I think that this number one was a significant divide in the results, right? She won with 60%, almost 60% of the vote. So 60-40. That's a pretty good margin right there. That's a wider margin than I expected. I would also say too that if we look at the district, right, it includes many different kinds of areas. You've got places where Andy Levin did well, which we would expect. Royal Oak, Ferndale, right? Those are places that do have, as you mentioned, many more sort of progressive Democrats as compared to more sort of traditional Democrats, right? He also did well in his home area. Bloomfield Township won a majority in several of those precincts. But if you look at other places in the district, Farmington Hills, Commerce, Wixom, Waterford, right? Those places are not where there's a bastion of liberal Democrats, right? That's where Haley Stevens did well. She won in central and western Oakland County. And the kicker, I think, is Pontiac, right? That's a city that has a lot of Democrats in it. It's got a lot of maybe progressive Democrats in it. Certainly a lot of African American voters. And I think it's important to note a couple things about that. One, Pontiac is currently in neither of their districts. So it was new ground for both Stevens and Levin. And I think it's important to note, and I'm not one who normally thinks endorsements do much, but I think we can look at Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence's endorsement of Haley Stevens, an African-American member of Congress endorsing Haley Stevens. That might have given her sort of an entree into Pontiac, where Brenda Lawrence vouches for Haley Stevens, and that sets her on her way to win every precinct in Pontiac.
We're joined by Dave Dulio. He is a professor of political science and also the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University with us on the Michigan Megacast, oakland.edu. For more information, it's oakland.edu/CCE for specific info from the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, especially as we head into a very competitive November election season here in the state of Michigan. Another race that was very interesting. And to go on from the Levin and Stevens race on the Democratic side, we go toward the general election in November. And in Oakland County, and in that particular district, in those particular areas, which have in the past been indicative of Oakland County, more leaning Republican, but in the past few elections have really been leaning more Democrat. On the Republican side, do you think that the Stevens challenger is going to make this competitive, given that there has been sort of a resurgence in a sense of urgency from the Republican Party? Do you see there being a chance of that similar resurgence, having a different energy in the Republican Party in Oakland County, and maybe making a race like this, the 11th district, more competitive?
It's going to be really hard. I think and I think the fundamentals of this new 11th district are simply that there are far more Democrats who live in this district than Republicans, right? It is, as far as I see it, as well as other folks who look at this stuff. I'll give you one that your viewers and listeners can go to. It's the Cook Political Report. They are an excellent handicapping and analysis shop out of Washington, D.C. I would be surprised if this wasn't on their list of safe Democratic districts, right? One that is just overly Democratic, where it's going to be really tough for any Republican, no matter who they are.
We're joined by Dave Dulio on the Michigan Megacast, professor of political science, and also is the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. On the west side of the state, Peter Meyer, an incumbent Republican, was primaried, as it's known, lost in the primary on the Republican side of the ballot. He is one of one of many that have lost their election races after voting in favor of impeaching former President Donald Trump while he was still in office. He is now the second House Republican that had voted for Trump to be impeached that has then lost in the following election after that. What does that say for Michigan's Republican Party and the direction that they're going, with Pete Meyer very much being a moderate Republican as it stands today? Is the moderate side of the Republican Party in Michigan at this point more of a moot point, considering Pete Meyer losing in this race with his more moderate stance? And of course, as you said earlier, the endorsement from Donald Trump for Tudor Dixon really putting her over the top in the gubernatorial primary.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the whether the moderate wing is dead. I think we need to see how things play out, because and things are always going to change and evolve, right? I think,
Sure.
but the Meyer Gibbs race is another one where there's no doubt that was a Trump effect, right? Gibbs, the Trump endorsed candidate, defeats Meyer in a district that leans Democratic, and I think here's maybe an uncomfortable Trump effect for Republicans, conservatives, however we want to put it. If Peter Meyer had won that race, I think he wins the general election in that third congressional district. With Gibbs winning, I think he loses. So that is another Democratic leaning district. I think Joe Biden carried that district, if we were to add up all the precincts in the new third, by 8 or 9 points in 2020. So it's a Democratic district. I find it hard to believe that a Trump-backed candidate is going to be able to win in a Democratic leaning area. And I think that the important part about that is beyond that one race, right? It's really about the Republican efforts to take back control of the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. As these primaries finish up, right, we'll have to take stock of the candidates that both parties have nominated and their fits for particular districts. John Gibbs might be and I don't know him, right? I've never met him. He may be a terrific guy and a terrific candidate, but not in that district, right? And just as you can look at other Republican nominees around the country and look at them and say, okay, is that person capable of winning an election? If we look at U.S. Senate seats in places like Pennsylvania and Georgia and some others across the country, what do those primary results mean for GOP attempts to regain control of the U.S. Senate, or in the Meyer Gibbs case, the U.S. House? In that, because if Gibbs loses, that's just one more seat somewhere else that Republicans are going to have to pick up to make Nancy Pelosi not be speaker anymore.
We're joined by Dave Dulio from Oakland University Center for Civic Engagement on the Michigan Megacast. Dave, one more minute with you before we'll need to say goodbye today. What are your key takeaways from this primary election in Michigan, and what that means, or what that could mean, at least at this time, in terms of a forecast for the general election in November?
Sure. I think Trump is a big, sort of at the top of the list, right? I think that was his presence was felt across the state. And I think you see that with the Dixon race. I think you see that with the Gibbs victory. And I think we also have to think about how this political environment in Michigan changed in the wake of the Roe versus Wade decision, the Dobbs decision that struck down Roe versus Wade. I think there is plenty of evidence to say that it has energized Democrats far beyond what they were prior. And that's sort of stating the obvious. But midterm elections are often all about turnout, where the party of the president often suffers a little in terms of its enthusiasm. And this may be very different now in 2022. I think so that's something to watch. The enthusiasm that voters have around that ballot initiative on abortion that's likely to be on the ballot in November. And the other one is, Joe Biden's approval ratings for his job as president are dismal, right? They are historic lows or approaching historic lows, mid-30s. Gretchen Whitmer's are much better, especially among independents. So we have to watch that. Does she stay with relatively high job approval numbers with independents, or does Joe Biden start to drag her down a little bit? That's something to keep an eye on.
Dave, appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. More information, of course, going to be coming forth and more seminars from the Center for Civic Engagement at oakland.edu/CCE. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tyler.